I want to welcome you back to our Jewish journey through the Gospel of John. We've taken a few weeks off because of the holy days, but we are back now, and well, it's been a few weeks since we've been on our journey. Let's re-enter, and we can do that best, I think, by reminding ourselves where we have been. Now, what you saw was the entirety of the Bread of Life discourse. And of course, people were very excited for Yeshua to be the bringer of all the bread and to feed them, to be the bread man. But he said, I am the bread of life. And he gave them a theological discourse. The theology of salvation that we saw dealt with human responsibility. It dealt with divine election. And it dealt with the eternal security of those who put their faith and their trust in the Messiah. Three major prongs to the message. Through the message, he became more and more what I coined called antagonistically cryptic. Became more and more difficult to understand, and his language became slightly more and more inflammatory. So that was a way of weeding out those who were not interested in hearing the message, who didn't have eyes to see, spiritual hunger to see that he was bringing the bread of life, not just bread to fill the belly. He told them to drink his blood and eat his flesh. And they said, what is that? Jews are not even allowed to have any blood, can't even eat a rare steak. And he wants us to eat his flesh and drink his blood. That's harsh, dude. And so there were many of his disciples who were following him to this point, and they said, no. After this, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and we are withdrawing from our professor's class. This is too much. It's too much. We saw that what Yeshua called his disciples to in John 6 was radical discipleship. And the basic diagnostic question that we saw was, is he in you? And we talked about when Yeshua speaks of eating his flesh and drinking his blood, he's not being literal. He is speaking of radical discipleship, speaking of integration, to combine separate parts, he and you, into a unified whole. Incorporation, blending, combining thoroughly to uniting as in one body. Internalization, absorbing something that it becomes part of self. And appropriation, taking possession for a particular purpose. So is he in you? Are you in communion? Is he in communion with you? That is the radical discipleship of the bread of life discourse. The integration, the incorporation, the internalization, and the appropriation, which three I's and an A, which I like to pronounce better. And let's move on. We saw the result, the consequences of the bread of life discourse was, number one, the abandonment of Yeshua by a percentage of his followers. The core disciples, however, as you saw in the film, reaffirmed their commitment to Yeshua. So it served the purpose for which he intended, to weed out those who weren't serious. And of course, Judas is identified to readers at the end of the chapter as the secret traitor who will betray him. But that's put on the shelf for now. Let's get to the new material. Chapter 7, an exciting chapter, and one that takes place around the festival of Sukkot, tabernacles. After these things, so sometime later, not immediately after, because if the previous chapter took place sometime around Passover, this is now 6 months later, the flip side of the year. 6 months has gone by. Jesus has stayed in Galilee. After these things, Yeshua was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk in Judea because the Jews, and when we see the Jews, it's the Jewish leadership, were seeking to kill him. There are Jews in Galilee too, right? There are Jews. It's Israel. It's the land of Judea. It's the land of the Jews. They're all the Jewish leadership. That's how John is speaking of the Jews when he uses that term. They were seeking to kill him. And you'll remember why they were seeking to kill him way back in John chapter 5. It's the last time Yeshua was in Jerusalem. He had healed that man who was lame at the pool and told him to pick up his mat. And it was Shabbat. Dun, dun, dun. For this reason, John 5:18, therefore the Jews, Jewish leadership, were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only he was breaking the Sabbath, but also was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So by the time we get to Jesus' discourse in chapter 5, it's far beyond just healing somebody and telling him, by the way, now that you can walk, pick up your mat, don't leave a mess behind you, and go to the temple and praise. He's now revealed a great deal about himself, and that sets him in direct antagonism with the Jewish leadership, with the Jerusalem leadership. But now, verse 2, the Feast of the Jews, it's a Jewish festival, in other words, the Feast of Booths, of Tabernacles, Sukkot, was near. We'll talk about the holiday next week as we explore this holiday in greater depth and the passage that as chapter 7 unfolds. But I want to remind you that the Jewish festivals in John's Gospel are an organizing theme. The structure of John is very largely positioned around various different festivals, as each festival reveals a new facet of Yeshua's power, purpose, ministry, identity, or miracles. And so we see chapter 7, Tabernacles begins, and the shadow of Tabernacles is going to extend through chapter 8 and even into chapter 9, some of the themes of Tabernacles. So this is the major holiday. That's why John leads off. He's not just giving you a time marker. By the way, 6 months later, this is what's happened. No, the whole purpose of what Yeshua is about to teach, what's about to happen, is predicated on this happening on Tabernacles. Therefore, his brothers said to him, we haven't seen Yeshua's family since chapter 2 of the wedding, but his brothers, but Yeshua's in Galilee, his Brandon's brothers, they're not believers, and they're not his disciples at this point. They don't become disciples until later on, post-resurrection. Therefore, his brothers said to him, leave here. You're in Galilee. You're in the backwaters right now. Go into Judea so that your disciples also may see your works which you are doing. You are working in the backwaters right now. You need to go, especially at Tabernacles. It is the big time. Anybody who's going to be there. One of the 3 pilgrimage festivals when all the Jewish people are commanded to go to Jerusalem. Don't waste your time here. Expend your time there. For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. You want the biggest audience possible for your ministry if you're really the Messiah, right, brother? Right, bro? If you do these things, if you actually do these things, show yourself to the world. Unleash yourself to the public. Don't stay in hiding here in Galilee. Go face the fiercest town in Israel, because like New York, if you can make it there, you'll make it anywhere. It's up to you, Yeshua, right? Jerusalem is the place you want to be, not Galilee. That's where you can make it. And they're saying this, I believe, because the brothers, having received the same education from the same sources, the same parentage as Yeshua, notwithstanding Yeshua's true parentage, his father, they understand basic biblical literacy that Tabernacles is related to the coming of the Messiah and to the ruling of Messiah in the Messianic age. And then it will come about, this is Zechariah 14:16, it will come about that any who are left of all the nations that went against Jerusalem will go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, the covenant God of armies, and to celebrate the festival of booths, of Sukkot. So Sukkot is tied in to your Messianic identity. Perfect. Go to Jerusalem and show yourself. Big guy, older brother, I dare you. Some of you are old enough to remember that commercial, okay? For not even his brothers were believing in him, which completely corresponds to what John told us in the prologue already, in chapter 1, verse 11. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him, not even his own family, not even his brothers. Not even his brothers received him as Messiah at that time. Later, but not now. So Yeshua said to them, my time is not yet here, but your time is always opportune. You're not the boss of me. I will go to worship at Sukkot when and if my Father gives me instruction to. He's the boss of me, not you. You can go anytime you want. You want to go now, you want to go tomorrow, you go. It doesn't matter. Your attendance at tabernacles is not going to make a difference in world events, believe me. Mine, however, it makes an issue. And so until I get the direct instruction from my Father, I'm not going with you. And furthermore, I don't think it's a good idea to go with you publicly, that because the whole pilgrimage, joining all the pilgrimage, Yeshua is very sensitive not to be pushed into a situation like an untimely, premature, triumphal entry at tabernacles at Sukkot when the expectation of Mashiach is very, very high. Nobody's going to mess with Yeshua's timetable. The issue of his hour, we've seen in John chapter 2, is what he said to his mother. My hour is not yet come. He says to his brothers, my time is not yet come. The hour is not yet come for his mother. You'll see that later, the hour. And then my time is an issue for you. And timing is everything when you're the Messiah. And he's not going to be dictated to by his little brothers. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me. That's why I have to be careful. I have to be intentional. Because I testify of it. Of what? Of the world. What do I testify? That its deeds are evil. Go up to the feast yourselves. I do not go up to this feast because my time has not yet fully come. Saying these things to them, or having said these things to them, he stayed in Galilee. But when his brothers had gone up to the feast, and they would have gone in large crowds from Galilee, would have made their way up to Jerusalem, big throngs, caravans, Yeshua stays back. But after the caravans are gone, after everybody's already arrived in Jerusalem, and his brothers had gone up to the feast, takes 3 days to get there, then he himself also went up, not publicly as it were, but in secret. Secret, not because he's being really sneaky, but because everybody has already arrived in Jerusalem. And if they're already in Jerusalem, and it's a 3-day walk to Jerusalem from Nazareth, then it's going to take him 3 days, and he'll arrive sometime around the middle of the festival when nobody is on the road. Talk about good traffic and clear highways. He's going to have no traffic whatsoever. So the Jews, now I have that highlighted because I want you to see in this passage, again, a very, very clear that there is a distinction that John is making between the Jewish leadership, whom he refers to consistently as the Jews, and the people, or the crowd, or you'll see in just a moment, the next verse, there is a contrast within the leadership and the common people, the crowd. So the Jews, the leadership, were seeking him, because remember, we've been told already, they were seeking to kill him. So yeah, now we get back to them, and from their perspective, they're looking for him. How come? Because they want to kill him. They were seeking him at the feast, and they were saying, where is he? Perhaps He's an obedient Jewish fellow. He's not going to blow off a pilgrimage festival. That would be counterproductive and counterintuitive to who he says he is. So we'll smoke him out. We'll smoke him out here, which no Jew, I think, has ever said at any time. But I'm just imagining. And we'll have him exactly where we want him. They're saying, where is he? And there was much grumbling among the crowds. You know, I don't know if you've been keeping track of how many times it tells us that the Jewish people are grumbling. But again, we're not like fine wine, but we are fine winers. And we do like to grumble. But there were much grumbling among the crowds. And so, again, Jews, leadership, crowds, common people. Because everybody is Jew. When it comes to the book of Gospel of John, unless you're specifically identified as a Gentile, you're Jewish. Right? Everybody's Jewish. So much grumbling concerning him. And some were saying, on the one hand, he's a good man. On the other were saying, on the other hand, no, on the contrary, au contraire, which is Jewish, Hebrew, for au contraire. He leads the people astray. And that is a very serious threat. On the one hand, a good man, okay, it's a very simple thing to say. It sounds, oh, he's a good guy. No. A good man means one to be followed. On the other hand, strong contrast. No. He leads the people astray, which should get your attention, because if you know your Jewish history, and if you know your Torah, you know that those who lead the Jewish people astray are worthy of death, according to Torah. If you lead the Jewish people away from their God, that is a capital offense. That's one that the Lord says, no. You need to rid the land from such a character as this. And in the Talmud, this is actually the charge that stuck in Jewish history regarding Yeshua. Not that he was a good man, but that he was leading the people astray. And in the Babylonian Talmud, it's the popular Talmud, oral law, in the tractate Sanhedrin 43a, this is what they wrote about Yeshua. On Passover Eve, they got the right guy, but everything else is incorrect here. On Passover Eve, they hung the corpse of Jesus the Nazarene after they killed him by way of stoning. And a crier went out before him for 40 days, publicly proclaiming, Jesus the Nazarene is going out to be stoned. How come? Okay. And again, remember, this is 600 years later, after the fact. This is now Jesus the Nazarene is someone who is passed into Jewish legend because of what's happened with Christianity, the explosion of the religion, and the relationship of Christianity to the Jewish people. So there's a lot of stories circulating among the Jewish people about Jesus, but this is the one that sticks and makes it into the oral tradition, the written version of the oral tradition. Jesus the Nazarene is going to be stoned because he practiced sorcery, and he incited the people to idol worship and led the Jewish people astray. He was an inciter to idol worship. And so that really, 600 years later, looking at that view that stuck, you see the origins of that view beginning in John in the passage. He's a good man? No. He leads the people astray. And you'll understand a little bit more about why the Jewish leadership is so intent on wanting to kill him and not just shut him down. Yet no one was speaking openly of him, of Yeshua, for fear of the Jewish leadership. So the crowds are all looking. Anybody see Yeshua? You see Yeshua? But shh, on the down low, because we don't want to make trouble with the Jewish leadership. But they're looking for him, but they're not talking about him very loudly because they were afraid of the Jewish leadership. It's a difficult thing when the common people are afraid of their own leadership. If you push the wrong button with the leader, who knows how they're going to react on you, right? And so you have to be afraid. But when it was now the midst of the feast, again, because it takes 3 days to run down, Jesus went into the temple. Ta-da! Here I am. You're looking for me? You found me. He went into the temple and he began to teach. And the Jewish people often were taught by rabbis in the temple. Some would teach on the outer steps. Many would teach in the colonnaded area that you can see on the outer end of the court of the Gentiles, the larger court there. And Yeshua hung his shingle. He shows up, hangs up his shingle, and says, okay, who wants to learn? The Jews, the leadership, were astonished then, saying, how has this, we haven't heard anything of Yeshua's teaching. We're just jumping to the point after he's taught. The leadership were astonished, saying, how has this man become learned, having never been educated? It's not that Yeshua or anyone from Galilee, believe me, lacked in education. Every Jewish person in the first century was basic, literate, familiar with Scripture, literate, able to read and write. So I'm not talking about he can't put letters together. He doesn't know his alphabet. He hasn't attended one of our authorized yeshivas. And if you haven't attended one of our Ivy League yeshivas, then he's not educated. So if he didn't attend one of our Ivy League yeshivas, then how come his teaching is so good? How is this man become? They're flummoxed by this. So Yeshua answered them and said, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. Rabbis like to teach in the name of their teacher, in the name of precedent. Their teacher and the teachers of their teacher used to teach this, and I'm carrying on the tradition. Yeshua doesn't do that. He actually does cite precedent. He does cite an authority, though. He says, my teaching's not mine. I'm just like you. I don't teach for myself. But actually, my authority is God. His who sent me is my teaching, where my teaching comes from. And if anyone is willing to do his will, watch this, if you're willing to do his will, he will know of the teaching, whether it's of God or whether I speak from myself. You can discern where my teaching comes from, the source of my teaching, by the basis of whether or not you are willing to obey God. That will be the key. If you can't tell where my teaching is coming from, it's because you're unwilling to obey God. He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory. The rabbis were always, this is recorded in Scripture. Yeshua says this. It's also recorded in the conversations of rabbis over the years, of one rabbi talking about another rabbi about seeking each other's glory and the glory that comes from one up. The whole midrashic system, frankly, the whole midrashic system of Jewish teaching and Jewish theological reading of the Scripture comes from the fact, first of all, that Jewish people by nature were not very good with sports. And so in the realm of athletics, we're never going to, very rarely do we find the Jewish guy who's able to compete but in the realm of creativity, with the text, nobody's better. And so it is a sport. And just so like guys would be out on the court showing off for the other guys on the basketball court, so too the rabbis would show off for one another and say, I see that interpretation and I raise you one that's even more creative, and here's how I got it. I connected this with this, and look at that. Trump that. Top that. He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, but he who is seeking the glory of the one who sent him, he's true. He's the genuine article. And there's no unrighteousness in him, which is another way of saying he is truly and wholly righteous. Did not Moses give you Torah, the law? And watch this. And yet, rabbis, leaders, most respected men in all of Israel who are here for one of the sacred three pilgrimage festivals, and yet none of you, not one, carries out the law, carries out the Torah. Why do you seek to kill me? So here's Yeshua's opening tabernacle salvo. There's 6 points to it. Think of it as Yeshua's Yeshua's opening salvo was a Jewish star. Okay? It's a shield of David. First of all, the teaching source was God himself. When it comes to his teaching, source is God himself. Point number 2, God sent him to teach. Point number 3, recognition of his teaching only achieved by those willing to obey God. You don't recognize my teaching? Diagnostic reads, you're not willing to obey God. Okay? Number 4, Yeshua seeks God's glory, not his own. Point number 5, he is devoid of unrighteousness. He's pure. He's holy. He's a true tzaddik, a righteous man, that good man that John mentioned before, that some of the people, he's a tzaddik, he's a good man, he's a righteous man. And 6, failure to keep Torah results in failure to recognize him. If you kept the law, you would recognize me. Remember? Because he said this in chapter 5. If you kept the law, you knew the law, you would know me because Moses wrote about me. But because you do not keep the law, you're dicey in your faithfulness to Torah. You fail to recognize who I am. So the crowd answered, you have a demon. Who seeks to kill you? So Yeshua gave his beautiful 6-point opening salvo. The crowd's response, their counter salvo is, 1, you stink and you have cooties. Okay? You have a demon. Okay? You're nuts. You're a nutcase. Plus, number 2, you're paranoid, right? Who seeks to kill? Talking about people wanting to kill you. Who seeks to kill you? You paranoid nut. Yeshua answered them, you know, I did one deed, one miracle, and you all marvel. This is the miracle last time he was in Jerusalem. He healed the man on the Shabbat, right? At the pool. You remember the story? Jesus saw him lying there, John 5. And he knew he had already been a long time in that condition. He said to them, do you wish to get well? Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your pallet and walk. Immediately the man became well and picked up his pallet and began to walk. Now it was Sabbath on that day. Dun, dun, dun. And for this reason, the Jews were persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on Shabbat. So that was just to bring you back to chapter 5, what he's talking about. For this reason, Moses has given you circumcision. Not because it's from Moses. By the way, it doesn't come from Torah. It's in Torah, but it doesn't come from Torah. The origin of circumcision is not in Torah. It comes from the father. It comes from Abraham. And on the Sabbath, you circumcise a man. You break the Sabbath. You violate the Sabbath. Remember Genesis 17, this is my covenant God makes with Abraham, which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you may be circumcised, and it shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. This is long before Moses and takes precedent, is what he's saying. So I know you elevate Moses as if Moses is the source of everything, but he's not the source of everything. Even something so basic as circumcision actually comes from the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, if a man receives circumcision on Shabbat, so that the law of Moses will not be broken, in other words, if that's okie dokie, are you angry with me because I made an entire man well on the Sabbath? Now, if we look at Jewish law, we look at the Mishnah and the Shabbat tractate, the Shabbat section, all things required for circumcision do they perform on Shabbat, because the Jewish people perform circumcision on Shabbat. It's not a violation of Shabbat. Again, Rabbi Yossi says this is Mishnah Nedarim. Great is circumcision. Circumcision rocks, in other words. How come? Since it overrides the prohibitions of Shabbat, which is subject to strict rules. And how? And the rabbis made them much stricter than God ever did. But nonetheless, that's neither here nor there. The conversation continues. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korah says, great is circumcision. Circumcision rocks. For it was not suspended even for a moment for the sake of Moses the righteous. And finally, in the Talmud, Yoma, section on the Day of Atonement, 85b, Rabbi Eliezer responded and said, if circumcision, which concerns only one of the 248 limbs of the body, right? 248 areas, okay, circumcision affects one of them, you know which part. If that overrides the restrictions of Shabbat, all the more so the whole of the body's salvation to heal should override the restrictions of the Shabbat. If somebody heals just one of the 248, that overrides. How about if we heal the whole man, all 248? That's even better. That should also override Shabbat. To heal on Shabbat is okay by the rabbis by the 6th century. He says, don't judge by appearance. Judge with righteous judgment, mishpat, with righteousness, justice, not with your opinion. And some of the people of Jerusalem were saying, isn't this the guy whom they're seeking to kill? Isn't this the guy they're seeking to kill? See, it's not paranoia if they're really out to get you. They just said, you're a nutcase, but Yeshua said, oh, no, I'm not paranoid. I know who's really trying to kill me. Look, he's speaking plainly, publicly. And the leaders, they're saying nothing to him. Now, that's very confusing. The rulers, who we thought wanted to kill him, well, do they not really know this man is the Christ? Do they really think he's the Messiah? They don't really think this is the Messiah, do they? And that's why they're not killing. We know they wanted to kill. They taught the big game, but when he shows up, they're not doing anything. Maybe they are convinced he really is Mashiach. However, that doesn't make sense, on the other hand, because we know where this man is from. Nazareth. Wherever the Christ may come, no one knows where he is from. This pulls a tradition, one of the traditions about the Messiah, that when he comes, he will come suddenly. He will appear from nowhere and deliver the Jewish people. And so they want to get into a theological argument now. Well, then Jesus says, enough is enough. Knock it off. Yeshua cried out in the temple, teaching and saying, you both know me and where I'm from. Cut through the smoke screen. You know me. I've been around for a while, and that shouldn't be an issue for you. Whether or not I'm Messiah, because I've been around, because the things I've done are amazing. Unprecedented. You know me, and you know where I'm from. And I have not come of myself, but he who sent me is true, whom you do not know. I'll tell you what you don't know. You don't know the one who sent me. You think you know God? Think again. I, however, know. You think you know. I know. You don't know him like I know him. I know him because I'm from him. And he sent me. Some are repeating some of the same themes that we've seen over and over again. Right? In John, Yeshua is the sent one, the one whose source is God. He leaves the very presence of his Father to be sent on a mission. He is the sent one, the one who descends from heaven to come to the world, to come to earth, came to his own did not know him. Right? But I am from him, and he sent me. So they were seeking to seize him. Can you see the diversity of opinion? That is, Jesus is such a hot topic. There's such a diversity of opinion. He's really turning a lot of people on and turning a lot of people. Very divisive figure. And they were seeking to seize him. And no one laid his hand on him. What do you mean they're seeking to seize him and no one laid it? So they want to seize him, but they stay back. They want to grab him, but they keep their hands to themselves. It's almost as if the crowd, even the ones who are the most antagonistic toward Yeshua at this point, it's almost as if they're not in control of their own desires, as if somebody is restraining them. And then, of course, you read then, the reason they didn't lay their hands on him is because Yeshua's hour had not yet come. The hour that is to come in John is Yeshua's glorification, is Yeshua's suffering, his agony, his triumph over death, and his victory over death and glorification. That's his hour has not yet come. And no one is going to crucify the Messiah before his time. The Lord, his Father, is going to see to that. And you know, I call this whole interaction, and you see this, and you'll see it throughout John as well, this visceral hatred, disgust, and you can try to really psychoanalyze it and try to get into it and say, well, it's because of theological issues, or because they really thought that Yeshua was breaking Torah, or he really was a threat to the Jewish people, or he really was. You can think of it on a sociological level, on a cultural level, on so many different levels. But I think ultimately the level of absolute antagonism that Yeshua engenders among the Jewish leadership and eventually the crowd itself, I think should be called Yeshua derangement syndrome. Let's end here with this. But many of the crowd believed in him. And they were saying, when Mashiach comes, he will not perform more signs than those which this man has, will he? Now, Yeshua hasn't performed a tremendous number of signs in the book of John yet. We're only in chapter 7. But John is only selecting a few to highlight, but he keeps alluding to all the other signs that Yeshua has done. Every time Yeshua shows up, there's something going on. We just don't have them all recorded because John said, you know, listen, I'll never finish the book if I record every single thing that Yeshua does. So this is proof positive that Yeshua is doing a lot more miracles than just healing the guy at the pool. And so a lot of people, on the one hand, are saying, I think this guy is the Messiah. How much more are we looking for than what this guy is bringing to us? But the Pharisees heard the crowd muttering these things about him. The chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to seize him. Will they succeed in grabbing onto him, seizing him, and taking him to justice before the holiday of Sukkot is over? I'm afraid I'm going to need to leave you in suspense. We'll pick the narrative up next week as we explore Yeshua's very beautiful and powerful and challenging Tabernacles Sukkot message next week. As we stand for the Aaronic benediction, which is your cue to stand for the Aaronic benediction, I want to remind you, of course, that prayer is of the utmost importance to us at Beth Sar Shalom, and praying for you is our priority. And so if there's anyone here today who has a prayer request they'd like to share, we would be very honored and privileged to bear your burden with you. If you have a praise, whatever it may be, we have a team up here who's willing and wanting to approach the Father with you and intercede on your behalf. So please avail yourself of that. If you have a prayer request and you don't share it with these guys, why not? And if you don't want to share it with these guys, well, then you can, of course, write it down on the blue sheets that are on your on the blue pages that are on your chairs, and submit that, and we'll pray for that on the internet. So let's receive the blessing. Let's receive the blessing of our God in this really, really special period of time between Yom Kippur and the kickoff Sunday night of the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths, Sukkot. Yivarechacha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Adonai panav alecha v'chunecha, Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'yasem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone.